Hi everyone. I want to welcome all of you to I think our third webinar that TAO's in conjunction with a number of other organizations around the world have promoted. And today we're really excited to be hosting 6 really exciting early career researchers. Before we start, I just want to, hopefully you can see my screen, but I want to say that this initiative really emerged out of a partnership between ANZLS, the Australian and New Zealand Association for Leisure Studies, the Canadian Association for Leisure Studies, CALS, the China International Leisure Research Association, the Leisure Studies Association in Europe and the UK, the Sociology of Leisure, the Academy of Leisure Sciences, TAOS, and also the World Leisure Organization. And today we've got representatives from a number of these organizations. So in the essence of time, what I want to do is I want to introduce our panelists and move forward with that. But before that, a few quick announcements. I want to also recognize my co-host today, Dr. Irina Sherieska, from Clemson University, and I'm Dr. Jason Baccaro from the NC State University. And I'd also like to recognize the TAO's Global Relevance Committee for its assistance in preparing this webinar, in particular, Dr. Kofan Lee from Indiana University, and also Dr. Linda Caldwell, most recently from Penn State University. So a quick other few announcements. Please, if you have any questions for the panelists, if you put them in the chat box, and we promise we will get to them at the end of this, at the end of the panelist remark. And this meeting also will be recorded so that it can be posted on TAO's website. For those that couldn't make it today, they would have the opportunity to look at the recording. So like I said, today's webinar is the future of leisure studies, and we have some tremendous early career researchers. I wish I was as accomplished as they were at their stage of their career, but I want to quickly introduce them, but there's certainly more details about them on the webinar announcement that went out. So first off, in no particular order, we have Dr. Shintaro Kono, who's an assistant professor in the warmth of the University of Alberta in Edmonton, and he's representing the sociology of leisure. Dr. Kimberly Lopez, who's an assistant professor in the Department of Recreational Leisure Studies at the University of Waterloo, representing CALS. We have Dr. Shannon Zhu, an assistant professor at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign in the Department of Recreation, Sport and Tourism, represented CILRA. And then we have Dr. Abby Sain Harper, an assistant professor in the Department of Parks, Recreation and Tourism Management at Clemson University, representing TAOS. And last but not least, Adam Tablet, a lecturer in the School of Marketing and Management at Coventry University, representing LSA. And finally, Dr. Adriana Quiroz, who is representing the WLO and is a professor at UFMG. And because my Portuguese is a bit rusty, I'm not going to try and pronounce that university. So welcome all of you. And with that, I'm going to throw out our first question to all of you. And obviously we're at a very interesting, and some would say exciting, some would say tenuous time as we start thinking about the future of leisure research. As all of you are early career researchers, I would say very, very accomplished early career researchers, how do you believe leisure research should reposition itself over the next 10 to 20 years to address some of the most societal and critical societal issues so that we remain relevant? And I'll throw that out to Dr. Kono to start off with.
Sure, Jason. Thank you very much for the introduction and the question too. I don't know, it's a good idea. Me go first, but because my answer is a bit weird, that I think the time is coming to leisure. That's my perception actually, that especially with the pandemic and COVID-19, everything else going on, I'm getting a lot of students who want to take some of my course that is available to all the U of A students. I'm getting some of the people who want to talk to me because of the research, the leisure research and other stuff that I do. People are interested more and more so from my perspective about leisure, and partially probably because with the COVID and everything, people lost a job, and got them thinking about leisure, or people cannot do the certain favorite leisure activity that they loved before, but they can't do it because of social distancing and maybe regulation. So, and I do this sort of like reflective assignments and learning with the students too, and they implement some of the changes to their leisure life, and they go like, this is more important than the grades. And I am so happy to hear that. And I think that's what's happening, that hopefully if any silver lining in this whole situation is that it's really good reflecting time for many people, and that's a bit of privilege to be able to think about the leisure and leisure life. And I think time is coming to it. So we really have to, I think, emphasize and articulate again. I know many scholars before us have done this, but I think newer generation, younger generation really, really have to emphasize that this is a time of leisure. Let's think about it. Let's talk about it more. Why do we talk about other things, work, family, education, more systematically, and we don't really about leisure? So really, I think it's a great time just to talk about leisure and research leisure in general. So that's my first take about it.
Just a quick follow up, Dr. Kono. Leisure is such a broad topic, and I think that's one of the challenges that we face. Do you think that there's a specific topic within the kind of broad leisure studies arena that you see as being extremely relevant over the next, say, 10 years?
Well, I'm a bit biased because I'll probably lean toward what I do, which is about leisure and well-being. And I think that's particularly relevant to what's going on right now, and I think in the future as well. So that's what I would say, and I would love to hear from other people about different topics. But I would also want to highlight that actually I love the breadth of the leisure studies, that I love tourism, I love sports too, I love what they do, but what leisure, the breadth of it allows me to do, the methodologically, theoretically, just the whole sheer of phenomena, I just love studying it. And that's what, to me, makes this leisure studies exciting so much. And I'm just happy to be in this field.
Wonderful, thank you. Dr. Sane Harper, I'd like to ask you that same question and come to you next, going from the northwest to the southeast geographically.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jason. And thank you, Shintaro, too, for starting out the conversation. So for me, I think these past 2 years, including this one, really 20 and 2021, has made it abundantly clear, at least for myself, that we're living in an era of heightened awareness of racialized injustices. And all of this is happening in the backdrop of a deepening ecological and health crisis that Shintaro just explained. And those crises predominantly impact racialized minorities, namely Black, Brown, and Indigenous people around the globe. And at the same time, there are massive uprisings, unlike anything we've seen in decades, right, that are taking place around the globe. Many are to denounce the racialized violence, like the Black Lives Matter movement. Others are organized around class struggle, thinking about the union workers in America, the farmers in India, or even the anti-imperialist protests that are taking place in Haiti. So all of these events are sending strong signal that we're living in a revolutionary era, right? That will extend way within the next 10 to 20 years. And as a disciplinary field, the leisure field, in order to stay relevant, we should not detach ourselves from those broader social and political discussions that are taking place within the global movement. Because leisure, recreation, tourism, all of those in their myriad of forms and social demographic compositions are all a product of those social and political orders that these movements are loudly contesting. And So I believe it's important for leisure researchers to be able to carve a meaningful space in this larger plan for radical transformation and help us move away from this insidious social and global order that we're currently enmeshed in. And I think some of us are already doing that by looking at issues of social justice, race and ethnicity, diversity and inclusion. However, it's unfortunate that so much of that research has focused on cultural preferences or social marginalities to explore leisure behaviors of racialized minorities. And not only does this impose a white-centric restrictive form of being and doing on racialized people, but it also trivializes their social and political realities and their struggle for self-determination. So I think instead we need to take a step back as a leisure field, right? And ask, how did we get here in the first place? And why are these issues persisting? Why are they being loudly contested? And this takes a look at the social and political forces, both historically and presently, that determine the material conditions of racialized people, because that is what defines ultimately who gets to participate in leisure, who gets to define for oneself how to participate, and whose lives are rendered vulnerable by the state and global white supremacy while occupying those leisure spaces.
So, Dr. Harper, I've got a quick follow-up question for you.
Sure.
The topics and the issues you raised are absolutely incredibly important. How would you respond to the fact that why should leisure scholars be integral in answering those questions as opposed to other disciplines? How would you respond to that?
Well, I think all disciplines really, because, but leisure particularly, as I say, because the forms of leisure, right? Our choices of leisure, how we get to participate in this are all shaped by these broader forces that I just explained, right? These broader political forces, social forces, ecological forces that define our everyday material conditions, right? And it's from there that we get to participate or not, or we get to be safe or not in these leisure spaces. So you cannot ignore those broader discussion. It's just an imperative to move beyond diversity and inclusion, because all diversity and inclusion does is how can we be more inclusive within a white world, like predominantly white-centric world, instead of asking how can we accommodate for the political and cultural struggles of these racialized minorities, right? Because they've been fighting for a long time for their own self-determination, rather than always having to fit within this world that has predominantly dominated by white supremacy, but also whiteness as well. So, but it's imperative. That's the only way you can really, have that radical transformation that you need for social justice.
Thank you, Dr. Harper. I'm going to go back over the border to Dr. Lopez. And being a therapeutic recreation specialist, I'm sure you have some very interesting perspectives on this question.
Thanks, Jason, and thanks to Abby and Shintaro. I am so pumped by this discussion. I'm so excited by it because when I think about leisure and how it's changed, even in the most recent years, that there's so many things that we need to unpack. I feel like things are happening so quickly that our brains just need time to process all that's happening in the world. So I think I want to start by talking about some of the strengths and how we maintain relevance in a world that through leisure. So first of all, like the sheer diversity of approaches that Shin had talked about, the ontological and epistemological multiplicity of leisure studies or leisure sciences, depending on your school, supports an ability to knowing differently and rise to the different needs of our times. I think this allows us an ability to draw on and interrelate with other disciplines And it's this openness, in my opinion, is what continues to keep us relevant. But to build on this further, this idea of diversity, it also applies to the very definition of leisure in and of itself. We see definitions of leisure or interpretations of leisure as simultaneously fixed and fluid, context-specific, generalizable, open to subjective interpretation, and yet also pinned down as a category for comparison with sharp delineations and boundaries. I often think about a paper back in 1985 by Sue Shaw, who talks about that. She says the ongoing problems of leisure, surrounding the whole area of leisure studies, concerns the conceptualization of the term leisure itself. And while I believe this is less of a problem now, it's still true today, but that's part of the beauty of our field. This idea to maintain some of the mystery that is the amorphousness of leisure. So again, remaining open to the multiple ways leisure manifests, is expressed, unfolds, becomes, is taken up. We're able to interrogate what leisure is, the good it does, but also, especially now, reckon with the harm it afflicts in the world. And I think now, while we recognize, and we have recognized, and we have studied that this idea of leisure can be a state of mind, time, activity, we also know leisure to be a form of resistance, a colonial apparatus, a veneer or veil to hide systemic injustice, and also an artifact and reproduction of class privilege and oppression. So I think this is one of our strengths of leisure studies, and how we can see leisure very differently across our different perspectives and schools and ways of thinking. And when I think about how to reposition ourselves, I'm challenged by that question. I really am, because I think, like, where can we not pivot to? We can pivot really anywhere. Leisure scholars, past and present, they see and talk about leisure in relation to current topics and social upswells. And this is, I think, needed and important work. But I wonder if it's less about positioning the field as a whole, and rather pivoting towards local and personal understandings of leisure in concert with these social shifts. For example, in light of the upswell and awakening to racial injustice, we're seeing how leisure is complicit in colonization, violence, oppression, intergenerational trauma, the exploitation and extraction of human and environmental resources. So these are how I kind of take up these ideas of leisure and where we can move next based on, some of the contextual happenings in the world today. And I think that perspective from which leisure is told is important, less so than more so than the what. So how it's taken up, sensorial or affective, first person, community narrative. These are just some of the ways that I think we're moving towards.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. That's very articulately described, and some of the issues that you brought up in terms of the detrimental aspects of leisure. I want to come to you next, Adam, because I know some of the issues that Kimberly raised. I know that's very, very specific to some of the research that you've started to engage in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I completely agree. Thanks everyone. But really agree with Kimberly there, that looking at those darker aspects of leisure and the way leisure is entangled with oppressive forces in various forms is going to be really important going forward. I think actually I would say leisure studies does that pretty well at the moment. That's something that we need to continue doing well. One of the things that I think more focused to it in answering this question on a challenge that I see, that I think in some ways what we should focus on going forward is leisure. I think actually maintaining relevance is going to be quite challenging, given that sort of leisure is becoming increasingly fragmented, very, very different forms of leisure. The six of us here have very different research focuses, and it's great that we can sort of tie those together. but the work and intellectual and theoretical work of tying those together, I think we can put more into that, and that there's more fruit that we can bear from that. One of the things I enjoy most about leisure studies and going to leisure studies conference is that wild diversity. One of the papers I chaired at the last in-person LSA conference had papers on grime music, which is a black British genre of rap. Think of Stormzy, for example. But in the same session, you had papers on celebrity fitness videos and a university bridge club. And despite what on the face of it seemed like wildly different forms of leisure, you get these different interconnections and different ideas coming out, and you can start to see the commonalities. I think we need to do more of that work of seeing commonalities. I think perhaps it's a thing in the UK, but we have become a bit too focused on narrower disciplines, things like sport and tourism, events and things like that. And there are institutional drivers to that. You know, it's an early career forum. I'll share that when I was looking for jobs, the jobs were teaching tourism or teaching events or teaching sports. There wasn't really jobs out there for teaching leisure. You know, the marketization of higher education has been shifting university departments towards training students for jobs and not educating them to think and understand about important issues. So we teach sport management and event management and tourism management, but not so much leisure studies. At least that's the case here in the UK. Obviously, this is a broader trend that, in my view, we should be working and resisting against, but I think it has a particularly deleterious impact on leisure studies because it is this broad area of study that covers so many different things. So I think carving out a space for the study of leisure as leisure instead of leisure as sport or as tourism and so on is really important, or continuing to do that work. You know, you see the study of work manages to do this even while addressing the breakdown of the Western work-leisure dichotomy, so covering issues that traditionally might have been seen as leisure from the perspective of work. But then I think also picking up on what Shintaro was saying at the start, to varying degrees, we've all spent the best part of the last year deprived of what we traditionally do for leisure. And so we're seeing as much as calls for catching up on missed work and education, also let's catch up on missed leisure. So it seems clear that the value that leisure has is often clear and evident for people in their everyday lives. But I think we need to do more to study leisure as a discipline. Yeah.
Kimberly, did you have your hand up to respond? Oh,
That was totally by accident. I'm still figuring it out.
Jason, you're muted.
Dr. Zhu, I wanted to come to you next and ask you, your perspective as someone who's representing both the China Leisure Studies Association and also now living in the Midwest. What are some of your perspectives in terms of the role of leisure?
I agree what the panelists already has talked about. I think those are all important topics that we should, that is make the leisure relevant and also adapt to the ever-changing world. So I think we cannot escape these discussions to just not talk about the current pandemics. And I'm sure that we are aware that the current pandemic is going to have a profound and prolonged impact even in the post-pandemic era. So I'm sure that we'll see a surge of research to understand, adjust the negative impacts of the pandemics in the next 10 or 20 years. But I think, as some Chinese saying goes, a crisis at the same time can be also an opportunity, and sometimes in disguise. So leisure research can also look at the potential bright sides of this pandemic, as Shintaro has just talked about, that this pandemic make people realize the importance of leisure travels and the outdoors in their life in a record high levels. And as a result, people will demand more accessible and quality leisure experience and also support more for such initiatives. So I believe this is an opportunity for leisure organizations especially public park and recreation agencies, to leverage this increased awareness and support from the general public as a way to increase their organizational capacity of leisure organizations and agencies to deliver leisure services. So I'm also biased because I think accessibility, make leisure more accessible is a part of the answers or part of the solutions to the social justice movements right now. So, and I'm biased because that's the topic that dear to my heart. So along these lines, a topic that I see being relevant in the next 10, 20 years is strategies and approaches to financing leisure resources that leverage these new levels of awareness and support, such as public referendums, donations, fundraisings, and user fees. And specifically how individuals, communities, and leisure organizations and agencies can work together to acquire more funding, resources, and supportive policy to improve accessibility, availability, and quality of leisure services. So that's my 2 cents.
Sharon, I want to just follow up really quickly with you. Obviously, you're living in the Midwest now, but you're representing the China Leisure Studies Association. When you think about some of the critical issues related to leisure, obviously you've certainly described some. Are there different critical societal issues that the Chinese scholars are thinking about, from their perspective related to leisure studies and leisure research?
I'm sure there's some difference because we have the largest populations in the world. So the challenge that leisure services or leisure provisions is very different in China than in the US. So for us, it's more about how to manage the big crowds of people, especially during the golden weeks when everybody's go out for travels, for leisures. It's just packed. So I think a lot of challenge that in leisure study and leisure research in China is how to manage the crowds, how to make sure that the leisure opportunity is more available and there's more to offer, and how to manage the safety issues of this crowd management. So it's a little bit different than here. And also we also have some issues with the disproportionate availability and accessibility to leisure services. And there are some in the urban level, the rural level, the rural area, the urban area, there are some difference in terms of that. But I think some of the scholars in China, leisure scholars in China, are trying to adjust that right now. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Dr. Quiroz, I want to kind of bring you into this as someone who's an occupational therapist by training, but someone who has a real passion for the benefits of and also some of the challenges facing leisure researchers. What's some of your perspectives in terms of like how leisure research could reposition itself, particularly representing South America today?
Yeah. Yes, today South America, tomorrow who knows. But I just wanted to translate my bio because somehow my bio got lost somehow. So I am an occupational therapist. By the time I was invited, I was a PhD candidate. Now I finished in leisure studies. And when Adam talked about more studies about leisure by itself, it made me think about it, how we have to really study leisure for leisure, not just correlated to other things, but I am biased. I study mental health as well. And I cannot say that leisure I don't know about the 10, 20 years, who would know that we would have a pandemic and in a few months, life would change so much. So it's kind of hard to say in 10 years, but definitely thinking about mental health, especially if I think about South America, that we are not, our houses are not far away from each other, as I've seen in the US or other countries. We like to be together in a lot of activities. And then being isolated, mental health was a very big issue. And leisure definitely helps to keep it on track, I would say. So we started doing some mental health packages, or things that we could do at home so it could help people. Also, if you think about leisure in the next 10 years, I would say the context, culture. We can be in US or in United Kingdom or in Brazil, as I am right now, but we have people with so many different cultures and backgrounds. And I think researchers have to get closer to it, to the particularity. We have to think about communities, which is collective, but we do have to think about individuals. So this gymnastic is something that we have to do more often, and definitely see the correlations, the relationships, the singularities, not just seeing the big thing. And then when I cannot pronounce your name, but I really would like to, the Midwest researcher, but I would love to, I'm sorry. But when you talked about financing, that made me think how sometimes we think about leisure, how much it costs, but we have to think about it as well as promotion and as something that people have at home, like things that they have at home. What can we do right now, especially the pandemic? A lot of people lost their jobs. And they keep saying, we cannot have leisure because first, we cannot go out. Second, we do not have money to go. But yes, we still can have some. So that's one thing that pretty much leisure has been changing and will change in the next 10 years. We will rediscover our own leisure. That's what I think. I think a lot of other things, but it's a good start, I'd say.
Well, I want to follow up with you, Adriana, because you talked about this gymnastics and ping ponging backwards and forwards, and certainly, some of these issues, Abby, that you brought up, Kimberly, you brought up, all of you brought up, actually, it's going to take us as scholars and researchers to think about things differently that we've traditionally done. As the future leaders and future or current leaders, actually, in many ways, and as scholars that are going to be the leaders for the next 20, 30 years, in our field, in the field of leisure studies, what methodological approaches and theoretical perspectives do you see us developing and gaining more importance in the future? Maybe, Adrian, I'll start with you first.
Yay, the last will be the first one day, right? So first I would say something that our colleague said, that we have to think about the interpretations of leisure. So for myself, I have the interpretation of a South American author that she says that leisure is in everyday life and it's very correlated with culture. So that's very important to me. That changes a lot, which means that I don't see leisure as something that I only do when I'm not working. I see it in my day. So right now, talking to you, I can consider leisure. I mean, as soon as I'm not as anxious. So that could be leisure. And it's my point of view. So my leisure is not the same thing as Kimberly would say, or swim. I don't know, I will learn your name. So it is different. That's the first thing. And then when I recognize that leisure is something that each person has its own interpretation, of course we can categorize, but each one has its own experience, then I can think of qualitative research. I think leisure has to go even more to qualitative research. Of course, quantifying is important. I'm not saying it's not. But especially the pandemic right now, I know I'm going back to the pandemic, but it's kind of like a cut in the world. Like it changed so much. So what I experienced as leisure, my financial, my economic background, what I have, my culture, that all changes. I mean, that defines, it helps me to define my own leisure. And it's totally different from another person's leisure. So I think researchers have to be pay more attention to these singularities. And then I go to quali, which can be quanti-quali as well. So interview, somebody said on the chat about internet or something like this. It's gonna be hard because a lot of people are done with those Google Forms. We are done with the Google Forms. It's gonna be hard to get close to people, but we have to figure out a way to get closer and closer to people, to really listen, really listen.
Great. Well, I appreciate the fact that you think that talking to me is leisure, because I don't think there's many people in the world that would quantify that. Dr. Kono, I'll ask you that question. What do you think are some of the theoretical methodological approaches and perspectives that you think will be gaining in the future?
Sure. In terms of methodology, I personally, again, that's my personal bias, but I have done mixed methods. And I think it's getting more and more common to mix things, that it's not a big deal to mix it, which I think is very exciting things that we have this range of tools that newer researchers are trained in different things, and they're sort of experimenting with the different things based on the problems that we face in a society, that things that we want to understand, the things that we want to change, and really use the tools, and including not just the traditional qualitative quantitative boundaries, but also some of the participatory action type of research too, that everything that cuts across those categories that we had before. Categories were useful, but also they were a bit of mental barriers. So I'm excited to see that more in our field. And another thing I want to mention is that theory. When I just last year, I think it was edited a special issue about the social psychology of leisure, which is partly what I do, most of the stuff that I do. I thought about, well, we need more theories of leisure, really. That theory that are applied, not theory that are applied to leisure, right? Borrowed and theory borrowers, metaphor that we got it from somewhere else and apply. We have had a few of those things, maybe more than few, but I think we need that more and more, because that would be our identities, that will ground us, who we are and where we are and where we are moving forward. So I think that's going to be very important. And in terms of sort of like a theory and methods, at the end, I wanted to also say that we have to challenge what we have done so far. For example, theory. Theory is important. I'm proud that the leisure study has been such a theoretically driven research program. But also, is that the only way that we do research? Research, right? In our engineering and computer science, there's a data-driven research is booming, which is another way to do research in the 21st century, 22nd century, second century. That's gonna be a big way to do the research, because there's so much information and data out there. And I think we have to think about that too. Somebody again talked about the internet and their online leisure, virtual leisure. We have to think about that. Another thing is about the paradigms too. We have this 4, 5, maybe paradigms and philosophies, ontological, epistemological things that we learn, but is that the only thing? Because I don't think so. We have so many researchers around the world, and I'm excited to see new generation coming up with, identifying different types of paradigms and philosophies and practices. And I'm going to stop there, and I think I'm going to pass it to Ira.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And we lost Jason for a second, but I'm sure it's probably a connection issue. So I am going to continue from here for now, for a few minutes. But the same question, theoretical, kind of methodological future. How do you see that? And I'm gonna ask maybe Kimberly to go ahead next.
Sure, thanks so much. I've appreciated the discussion and how, much people have talked about the diversity of approaches and our embrace of the diversity of approaches that we take up in leisure studies. So thanks for that discussion. I do think this discussion of theory and method are, one and the same in some ways and very intertwined. In addition to like these topics of inquiry that we are all interested in, and how do we get on the next wave? How do we become on the cutting edge of this research? And I think it's really interesting that we're having this discussion now. With regards to methodological approaches, I continue to think that we're moving in a direction that's indigenous, taking up indigenous approaches, methodologies that focus on unlearning, anti-convention, anti-methodology, data generation, so anti-conventional approaches to methodology, data generation, representation. For example, non-English written works, anti-written text, anti-conventional grammar presentation, non-Eurocentric and non-site-centric means for sharing information. So also like this idea of anti-methodology and what methodology does to continue to work within systems that continue to oppress and marginalize and disenfranchise people. I'm learning a lot of this from my students, frankly. They're teaching me new things every day, and the things that were boring from other fields like body studies, communications, performative methods and methodologies, and the way that these methodologies are taken up in really slow ways. So this need to publish is important, but what does that actually ask of us as citizens in the research community? What does that ask of participants in the community that we hope to work with and hope to liberate from these oppressive structures? I think that we need to do more thinking about how we need to kind of disentangle this from, or take apart some of these expectations that continue to limit our potential, frankly. So I also see like theoretical frameworks that are focused on ethics and relationality, intersectionality, not the Crenshaw type, but yes, also the Crenshaw type, but the interrelations and interactions of oppressions, particularly around non-human, more than human relations, local and global phenomena, those types of interrelations. And also like non-binary understandings of leisure. So that's how I think, and also non-Western epistemological positionings. I see those as being really important theoretical contributions to our field in the next few decades.
Love this. Thank you so much. And by the way, if you, don't see the comments from our audience, everybody is very excited about this conversation. And I think it's very powerful to bring up so many kind of different issues in this space. And I love the topic of creativity, right? In our positions of researchers, we do have so much opportunities to kind of bring in new methodologies and new theories and kind of combine together things from different fields. So certainly I think a strength of our field of leisure kind of in general, because we are so interdisciplinary. Great, awesome, thank you so much. So I am gonna just go in order that is on my screen. So Adam, would you like to take the next round?
Sure, yeah, I completely agree with everything Kimberly's just said. I think that's a really nicely articulate way of putting it. I think leisure has been really good. Leisure studies has been really good at adopting some of these sort of participatory methodologies and approaching sort of research as a process of co-creation of knowledge. But there's also more we can do. I think when you look at leisure studies as a field, you could quite easily see it. It's a field that's dominated by North American, European, and Oceanian scholars. I'm not sure if Oceanian is the right word, but yeah, Australia and New Zealand. And they tend to study leisure in their own societies as well. So that's a huge problem for the future of the discipline, hopefully for fairly obvious reasons. But we do, I think, need to decolonize leisure studies in terms of who the scholars whose voices we hear, but also where we're doing our research. you could look at some of the leisure journals and conferences and just assume that leisure doesn't happen in the global south, which is just obviously preposterous. It's great, in fact, to see today that we've got such a great panel of scholars from some of these areas, but also scholars who've done research in the global south as well. I think the point that Adriana was making as well about sort of different understandings, different cultural understandings of leisure is going to be really important going forward, to think about different ways that people conceptualize leisure. Think about Boaventura de Sousa Santos's epistemologies of the South and the way from the global South bringing ideas and different ways of understanding leisure, because obviously traditionally where it comes from in the West is that opposition to work from Industrial Revolution and things like that. So that's not something that we should be imposing on others. And again, picking up what Kim said, I'm not just copying everyone else, I promise. There are these institutional challenges that publishing and Perish, these co-creating methodologies take a lot of time. They demand a lot of intense work, and the pressures that we have in our jobs to pay the bills point us in a different direction, that point us towards quick fixes, quick publications, and limited engagement ultimately. We've also traditionally had geography as a challenge of doing research all over the world. It's obviously easier to do research that's on your doorstep, but as we can see literally right now, those challenges can be overcome with technology. So that fragmentation of leisure that's occurred in the last few decades does require that we work much more closely with people to fully understand their experience of leisure and how leisure shapes their lives. And I think the other thing that's worth bearing in mind when we think about leisure studies as a topic going forward is that there is lots of really fantastic research on the positive benefits of leisure for individuals and communities, particularly around health and well-being, in various forms and contexts and various meanings of those terms. That's obviously reflective of funding streams and a need for doing impactful, meaningful research, but it's also, it obscures some of the darker, more toxic forms of leisure and toxic consequences of leisure. So we need to make sure that we are still doing work on those forms of leisure that are abusive and damaging to other people, as well as exploring how traditional forms of leisure actively contribute to marginalization, such as human rights violations in supply chains. And that's really important, I think, to a more rounded and more accurate understanding of leisure and the role it plays in our contemporary societies going forward.
Great, thank you so much. And I believe Jason is back with us. Jason, can you hear us? Great.
I'm having internet problems. I don't know if you can hear me.
We can hear you now, yes. And we have Shintaro, Kimberly, and Adam answered the second questions by now.
Great. Well, thank you. Sorry, I apologize for that. So I just want to throw it out to anyone else. Abby.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just, because a lot of what just been said between Kimberly and Adam, but also Adriana, is very much tied to some of the answers that I've been thinking about around this second question, right? The importance of really being open to different ways of knowing, right? Accepting that other people have their own value, their own belief systems that are out of their, this Eurocentric way of seeing the world and being and doing. So being open to that, right? And of course, having to change, hopefully, the publication landscape or even the tenure, all of these tenure restrictions that we have that sort of restrain our own creativity. So I also, in terms of theoretical perspective, I think that we don't necessarily have to bring in new theories. There are plenty of theories out there that have been underutilized in the leisure field, right? And others that have been overutilized in the leisure field, and I'm thinking about anti-colonial, post-colonial theory, right? And I don't want to say decolonial theories, because I think decolonization have been overused and misused to talk about things that are incommensurable with the actual act of decolonization, which is giving land back and body as well. So talking about anti-colonial theory and post-colonial theory, and I just wanted to read this quote by Stuart Hall, who is a post-colonial theorist, and he says, in the case of colonial and post-colonial, what we are dealing with is not two successive regimes, but the simultaneous presence of a regime and its after effects. Colonialism persists despite a cluster of illusory appearances of to the contrary, right? So we're very, very much still in a colonial regime. Whether you ascribe to it, you believe in it. I personally believe in it. I think others also believe that we're living in a colonial global order, social order. So I found myself sort of pushing my scholarship and engage more in anti-colonial, post-colonial, Black and Indigenous liberation movements, and also racial capitalism work. And I think that the leisure field can really greatly benefit from looking more at anti-colonial and post-colonial theory to explore these enduring social and cultural and political impacts of colonization and the multiple places of power, right? Because post-colonial theory is really has been helpful to me anyway, to understand the ubiquity of power, right? And the extent of social domination, political domination, cultural domination, right? But really understand the ubiquity of powers at play that are defining our everyday lives, right? Public and private lives, and ultimately structures our participation in leisure across race, class, and gender. So this is where my scholarship is positioned at this point, and I'm just hoping that some of you in leisure will also find it just as valuable as I have lately. So thank you.
Abby, can I follow up with a question?
Yes.
You know, Shintaro before was talking about the fact that for leisure, that he feels it's important for the field of leisure studies, leisure sciences, to really develop their own theories to gain that additional credibility, as opposed to borrowing from sociology, psychology, other disciplines. And yet you felt that isn't necessarily the case. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Well, I'm not against the act of creating your own theory, right? I mean, we're a discipline, right? But what I'm saying is that some of these theories that we may be seeking to develop are probably existing, but in another field, right? So instead of reinventing the wheel, perhaps look at what's out there already that we can borrow, instead of having to always running that marathon of redefining ourselves and finding a new theory. So I'm not against that, but I'm just cautioning that whatever theory we end up coming with may already be out there. I mean, we are still very much informed by sociologist theory, right? Psychologist theory. So political science, I mean, all of those other disciplines are already informing our work, and that's where I'm coming from. It's probably already out there, but I'm not against the fact that we need to, create our own theory or invent our own theory. But for me particularly, I just find other theories, like the ones I just mentioned, to be very valuable for my work.
Thank you very much, Abby. Any of the other panelists want to address that particular issue?
I can go. So I probably come from a little bit different perspective. So I'm here to advocate a little bit for experiments as a methodological approaches. I think experiments will gain more importance in future user research, as it allows for us to direct investigate cause and effects under highly controlled conditions. And I believe that, and I'm biased in that way, that causal relationships are part of the critical, critical components to theories and knowledge developments. So I advocate for that. I also think that quantitative interviews is also a very important part, but I think maybe we need to have more of the experiment research to understand the causal relationships in leisure, especially how leisure is, we already know that leisure has a positive impact on our physical and mental well-being, but establishing that causal relationship will make a stronger case for us. And I also think that leisure and tourism scholars are more and more aware of the limitations of a one-off, cross-sectional, single-sourced, and self-report research design, especially its limitations in external validities and generalizability. So because of that methodology approaches that embrace mixed methods, multiple studies, longitudinal data, and non-self-report measures, I think is developing and gaining importance. But also, this also goes against the pressures of tenure, like Abby and Kimberly said, kind of like puts a little bit of pressures on those studies that embrace mixed method, multiple studies, longitudinal data, and non-self-reporting measures. So hopefully something will have more rooms, more time for us to have that type of studies. As for theoretical perspective, I'm a little bit agreed with Abby that there was some of the theories out there that will help and leisure will benefit from learning those theories, and think behavioral economics theories can offer fresh and actionable insights from leisure scholars and practitioners. Again, I'm biased, but when we pull all our biases, we'll have a holistic view. And behavioral economics, if you probably not many people familiar, is a field applying insights from psychology to understand how people make decisions with irrationality, biases, and heuristics. And understand these biases and heuristics underpinning human behaviors, we can design and test incentives and messages for promoting leisure and nudging behavior, such as more physical exercise, more leisures, promote pro-environmental behaviors, pro-social behaviors. So for example, emphasizing psychological ownerships in park signs by just simply saying that, welcome to your park, can enhance park visitors' effortful stewardship, such as picking up trash, donating money to the park. So those simple behavioral techniques can be influential in promoting leisure and behaviors for good. Yeah, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Well, I want to thank all of the panelists today for their excellent comments. And I want to pass it over to Irina now, who has some questions from the audience for each of you to answer. So Irina.
So we have lots of great questions, actually. So I'm going to try to combine some of them together. So and I appreciate the audience for staying engaged with this discussion. There's certainly lots of great feedback on the chat. So first question is kind of combination of a question from Stefan Lawrence and David McGillivray. And the question is, our major challenge in leisure studies is to develop a new theoretical apparatus to understand better our late modern digital moment and depart from our weddedness to analog theories. What do you think? And just kind of in line with this question about technology and where we kind of take it from here, David responded, hopefully we'll move beyond the notion that digital and analog leisure are necessarily so different. If this pandemic has taught us anything, it's that you don't have to be in close physical proximity to enjoy leisure time activities, state of mind. Of course, meeting in person is important, but it's not the only way to enhance well-being, etc. So the question is about technological changes. We actually, very quick announcement, we'll have pretty soon coming up a webinar about technology in general, but hearing from our kind of future experts and professionals right now, what are your all thoughts about technology in theory? Where should we take that? And who would like to go first? Who has a thought?
I guess I can jump in. I'm still sort of forming the thought in my head, so this might be a little bit rambly at the start. But I think that while there is a need to sort of think about digital leisure in a new way, obviously the way we do leisure digitally does have, sort of on the face of it, important differences to analog or in-person leisure. I think probably there's not a great deal of difference theoretically in terms of how we think about what value leisure has and the meaning it has in people's lives. But I think there is, I remember seeing early on in the pandemic, some reporting on a neuroscience study showing that basically it was as an explanation of why after a Zoom class, we're all way more tired than after a normal class, because being there with a face-to-face person doesn't activate the same endorphins or whatever it may be. I'm not a neuroscientist, but it doesn't activate the same things in our brains to sort of give us the same sort of kick as a face-to-face interaction does. So I think there are some differences, obviously, between how we approach analog and digital leisure, because if we're not getting that kick of endorphins when we're meeting online, how we do leisure and how we enjoy leisure, and therefore the meanings it will have in people's lives are going to be slightly different. But I think as well, it's also worth bearing in mind that we are in the midst of a pandemic still. It may be that after this, we all decide Zoom's rubbish, isn't it great to be able to see each other again? And all these digital questions are much less important.
That's a very good point. We certainly brought up kind of technology to the forefront with this current situation. Certainly the technological developments are happening despite that, and there are probably better, need for better understanding within the concept of leisure, how leisure kind of overlaps with technology, and are they really that separate, right? And what theoretical kind of approach we can use for that. Wonderful, thank you, Adam. Anybody else has thoughts on that?
No. I would tend to agree with Adam's point, and actually bringing in Abby's idea of borrowing on these foundational understandings and epistemological positions of how we understand the digital as simply another medium through which to investigate or interrogate some of the relations that are occurring over this platform. While there certainly are nuances in relating to one another in this space, for example, the idea of anonymity, or the idea of fatigue, how that's different, or the overwhelming nature of news and social media in bombarding us with the various messages that we consume on a daily basis. I think some of the structural ideas and ideas of cognitive colonization even are applicable in these spaces. So I'm not saying that new theories are not needed, but I see the application of existing ways of knowing as being useful in these spaces as well. That's my perspective.
Thank you so much. And we have quite a few other questions. Does anybody else wants to respond to that one?
I'll ask the next question. And we've got a great question from Maliga in South Africa. How are all of you as leading emerging scholars addressing cross collaboration to promote leisure, particularly to address issues that are big, you know, like the social injustice issues and issues related to the ramifications of the pandemic? Does anyone want to take that question?
Well,
Shit. Oh, Abby.
no, well, I was just going to say that I think cross-disciplinary, interdisciplinary collaborations are necessary. And I think this was something that's been happening and stressed upon even before these current events that we've been seeing in the past 2 years. I mean, it's been stressed for the past decades now. So at the university level, at least in Clemson, I know that there's a lot of push, you know, seed grants, any forms of incentive to, you know, incentivize cross college, not just within the college or cross department, but even cross college collaboration. And this is really not just within the leisure field, but any field, you know, is dealing with, right, that cross-disciplinary collaboration. So my point is that we are living in an era of cross-disciplinary, and the incentives are being put in place for all of us, you know, that forces us more and more to move towards that way.
Is that the case for the rest of you?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing with the Abby, that my university has the same issue, that there are internal campus level, faculty level that are facilitating cross-cultural, interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary work, as well as at the national level. Canada, we have what is called a Tri-Council federal funding for social science and humanity, as well as health research and other things. And they have some sort of interdisciplinary emphasis. So definitely that. And I have some work, a small work done, and in that part of it was about pandemic and COVID. And we have some work with our psychologists, and you know, they want to focus on COVID and other things. And I want to, no, there's a leisure components to that too. So there's that bit of a conversation, you know, a bit of a negotiation always, that leisure is important side of our life. And when I say important, it doesn't mean that leisure is always a good thing. Again, like the entire panel is emphasizing that the harm that brings, you know, the ugly, bad side of leisure is also, we need to understand, we have to change it. And that conversation always have to happen among us, between the collaborators. So I think that's unique, not unique, but the challenge of leisure scholars. So that advocacy for your discipline, I think that's important for the newer students generation, and also your newer generations sort of like experiences working in it, and even getting a degree from different things. I am straight up leisure scholars, like my old degrees are from leisure. I'm proud of that, but also I regret that a little bit too, right? I'm happy to see people from geography more coming in, economics more coming in, all that kind of stuff. I think it's exciting.
Hi, Maliga, right? The one that asked?
Yes.
I would say that what I'm trying to do is jumping in. So being in the World Leisure Organization helps me to connect to other people from around the world. Also, because of my PhD, I had to travel a lot. So I went deeper in South America, and then I went to the North. And then I got to know a little bit more. That helps. And also trying to talk to other professionals. Like when I said jump in, it's like being a recreational therapy, as I did this week, seminar. And that was hard, and at the same time, interesting, because I studied leisure in a different way that they do. But we connect, we complement each other. Also, being a post-graduation, I mean, my master's and my doctorate was in leisure studies. So, and we had people from all over, like geography was there, we had business, so we had so many people, and then that's a good idea to share our points of view and learn from each other. Well, I'm still a very recent scholar, but I try to connect with people every time I can. And the first thing I do is just jump in and hope they say, hi, well, you're welcome. That's what I try to do.
And if I may chime in, I think collaboration not just meaning that collaborates with scholars from other disciplines, but also collaborations with community organizations, with the communities, with stakeholders, if you're doing any community participatory research. I learned a lot just to talking to people in the community who doing constructions, doing urban plannings, business owners, entrepreneurs, and extension educators. I think that's also a way for us since leisure affects our lives in various manners and aspects. There is a lot of that we can talk to the communities, to the stakeholders, to extension educators. So I think that will be another good ways that we can adjust collaborations to promote leisure.
Have anything they want to add?
I just wanted to add something really quickly. I think what allows us to kind of ease into these transdisciplinary discussions so nicely is that leisure is not a discrete and defined thing. Like, I think that by saying like we are experts at leisure, it's really challenging to say, you know, or define leisure in what is one way or another. I see leisure as life, you know, and it's beyond this dichotomy of labor and leisure and recreation and leisure and rest and leisure. It's super messy. And I think by saying that, you know, leisure encompasses all facets of life, it enables us to enter conversations at different points and say, you know, we understand the history of leisure and some of the damaging effects, but also the positive effects and how it creates, I don't want to say creates community, but is a mechanism for fostering community and enables all of these relations to occur, however complicated or challenging or disruptive. So I think leisure has a tendency to allow us an in different ways because everyone can connect to that idea, however it is defined for them.
Excellent points, Kimberly. I want to ask the next question because it comes from another emerging scholar, and it's a great question that they posed. As a recent PhD graduate of tourism, studying well-being benefits of family vacations, I don't relate much to the economy-driven tourism programs anymore globally, nor do I see many leisure homes to apply for. Any advice before I lose hope in academia?
Don't you ever.
Well, we're still here.
We're still here. I would like to jump in. So I'm also, by training tourism, I'm one of those what they call T generations that I got a degree from bachelor all the way to PhD at tourism management degrees. And I find a home here in the departments of recreation, sports and tourism. And we have, in our department, we have scholars from leisure, from recreation, so from sports and tourism. And we talk to each other. So don't lose hope. There's still a lot of opportunities out there that you will find a home that in leisure, if that is what you want to, what is your ideal workplace. And there is still a lot of programs that also appreciate the leisure aspects of, and I find it fun being housed in a leisure, recreation, sports, and tourism department as a tourism scholar. So don't lose hope. I think that's my.
Anyone else want to expand and give hope?
I can sort of jump in. I think, yeah, I can sort of share the frustration to some extent of the sort of economy-driven, not so much tourism. In my case, it's sport, that we've gone from what I studied, which was sort of sport studies and sport development, You still have sport development to an extent, but now it's much more sport management. And it's very economically focused. It's about creating workers, and it's not ideal. I would love to be teaching slightly different things. I hope none of my students are in here. But I think to being in the position, and once you get into the positions, you can change it. There are opportunities to change it and shape this discipline however we want it to be shaped. Obviously, there are various pressures that we face, but the fact that the programs seem too economically driven right now doesn't mean they always will be. I think certainly there are plenty of people who would want to see it take a much more experience focus in terms of what those programs are and how they focus. So don't give up hope, and also don't be too put off, because obviously you can be the change you want to see in the world, I guess.
Thank you, Adam.
Oh, I'm sorry, Shintaro. Okay, no, I was just going to say, I think from reading the question again, I don't relate much to economy-driven tourism programs anymore globally, because they're more focused on well-being benefits of family vacations. And I think, well, myself anyway, I totally relate to that because of the myriad, issues that economy-driven tourism causes, right? The local impacts on communities. So that does not mean for that student particularly that she or he cannot carry that work, right? I mean, I'm very much community-based. I look at indigenous participation in tourism, but also looking at, well, outside of leisure, when I was still doing a lot more work in tourism, because I'm from Senegal, and a lot of my tourism work was there, but I was looking at issues around property rights, right? Looking at public-private partnerships, negotiating power. I mean, there's a breadth of topic that you can take on within those departments that are, as you place it, economy-driven tourism. I think we've come to a point now as a society that we've realized, and as a discipline, right, that it's not all about the economy. There are all of these other aspects that we need to consider. So I don't think you need to lose hope. What you're looking for is very much in there. And to build back on what Adam said, I think, just shape it. You have the freedom to, well, I think I hope you do anyway, but I think you have the freedom to really choose your research line within these departments. So I don't think it's a dilemma that the same dilemma that you think that you're going into anyway. So.
Thank you, Abby. Shin, did you have something that you wanted to add?
Yes, Jason. And can I try to give different kinds of hope? It's not awfully utterly optimistic, but I think I hear this question. And I think it's not fair many of us who already have a tenure track job to actually say some optimistic stuff, because we're on a more secure side, and I don't think it's fair. And I think that this is a really bad reality right now. And I think it's irresponsible to say that things are gonna get, better soon, really. We don't know. But I love, of course, Sharon, your optimism. I love that. Now, my take is that I have a bit of sadness toward the end of sentence. Any advice before you lose hope in academia? Academia is fantastic. I love this job, and I think this is such a privilege. But at the same time, there are so many jobs that are out there so meaningful, that are making the society better. And in your training, if you have done your PhD well, your training, the skills and experiences that you've got should set you up. And I think our job, the newer generation of scholars and mentors, as well as many other people, that we continuously highlight, what you have done there, presentation, that translates to this. Your writing, this. Your grant writing, this. So that person, when it comes, yeah, I can do academic, but I can do so many other things, so that they don't feel that way. This is a good job, but this is not the only job, and you can make the society really good place, probably in many different ways. So I just want to put that out there for now.
Thank you for sharing that perspective, Shin. Sharon, you had your hand up.
Yes, I appreciate Shin's comments, and I agree with that. It's not a good time, and because of the pandemic. But if you are really wants to stay in academia, I don't really see a very clear lines between economic driven tourism program and well-being oriented driven program. It's all about how you make the connections. So I am from the business side, I'm a marketer, but part of my work, my research is how we can use marketing principles to improve people's and communities' well-being and welfare. So you can also make the case that tourism is driven by people's motivation to get well-being benefits from family vacations, and that is part of the roots in this tourism economy. So it's about how you see things connect and how you position yourself in that way. So yeah.
Thank you, Sharon. Irina, I think we've got time for one more question.
Perfect. And there's lots of great questions. So I apologize to all of our audience members whose questions will not be asked today. We'll pass them on to our panelists, and if any of them feel particularly strongly, they hopefully respond to that. But one of the questions that I thought was particularly kind of connected to this discussion about collaborations and kind of finding your place, right, in the field of leisure. I thought, this question from Andrea Diaz was very interesting in terms of also this panel that is kind of connected so globally, right? So as academic and outstanding early career researchers, how would you transfer all the knowledge you have to non-English speaking countries? And I found that in my own case, very challenging task. So I wonder if any of you have more experience kind of doing this work.
So the question was asking, how do you translate to non-English? Is that what it is? Okay.
So Andrea has an impression that leisure studies is predominantly an English-speaking field in developed countries. Is there anything that you're doing or envision doing to translate this work that you do into more non-English speaking countries, more potentially developed countries?
I think Adriana may have a good answer for that, at least better than mine.
Actually, I'll have the answer for the other way around, but Andrea, is that your name? Because I can't see the chat. It's so hot here that I'm trying not to use the computer because I can't move the arrow around. Well, I totally agree with you, Andrea. It's hard. We only find things in English, and even more difficult in Spanish, or in Portuguese. We have some magazines, some journals that help. But in English, it is hard for some people that don't access. Also, to publish in those journals are really hard for us. Some, not the leisure ones, but in general, some journals that are English speakers or English writers, they ask for a very big fee that's kind of big for us, expensive, or sometimes just all we have to do to publish in them, like pay for editing, translating, and it's kind of hard for us. But what I have found is research groups. So in my research group, we read and then we talk about the article, and that helps, because then it's one helping another one that doesn't have a very good English. Keep studying, that's another thing, unfortunately. Well, if you are from a federal university, we used to have some opportunities to keep studying English, and that's a good idea as well. Besides that, I would say enroll yourself in a class if you can, because then professors, sometimes they break down some theories as well, but I know it's not something practical. It's not, I'm just putting it out there, as somebody said. And the other way around, it is very hard for me to publish. So what I do is I'm trying to keep the South stronger. So I publish in Portuguese or I publish in Spanish. And when I try to publish in English, I have some collaborators from other countries, and then they help me with the English. Because then a day-to-day English is totally different from an academic English. And it's another thing that's hard too. And once again, being brave and putting myself out there. That's all I can do. Sometimes, you know, the editors, they help you. So you send them, if it's a good journal, if it's a very loving journal, then you send your paper, and then sometimes they write something about it. Oh, that you could use another grammar, you could use that other English, that other word, which is hard as well, because then cultural aspects get lost. I don't know where you are from, but at least in Brazil, we write a lot of words to say a sentence in English. So that get lost in cultural aspects, you know, in the paper. But that's what I have been doing. If you have other ideas, please share.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Can somebody unmute me, because I can't move the thing? Yeah, got it. No.
Thank you very much, Adriana. There's time for one more response to that question. If any of the other panelists want to jump in.
I just have a quick comment, and I'll share the time with Adam if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
I think this is the work of leisure studies. We predominantly privilege English, and we are constantly allocating credit and prestige to English journals and English ways of producing. And I think with the movements that we're seeing in the world today, that needs to be not necessarily abolished, but it needs to be reconsidered so that folks don't have to work so hard to connect with each other, in my opinion.
It's a very good point. Adam.
Yeah, I was going to say, I appreciate Adriana saying that enrolling in a class can help. I think any English speaking scholars who only speak English, reading and working in a second language in academia is very rewarding to your scholarship. I speak Portuguese, having done my PhD focused on the Olympics in Rio. I read in Portuguese and I write in Portuguese occasionally. And it's a different way of approaching it. But again, when we've been talking about those different ways of knowing, it really helps to have that language and gives you a different way of thinking about things. So it's useful for English speakers as well to think about, should we be just relying on English as this lingua franca of academia, or should we be sort of active in challenging that in our own practice? I think as well, I'm seeing in the participants in the audience, there are some of the editors of some of the leisure journals. They should probably be open to accepting manuscripts that aren't in English, whether that's paying to translate from the big fees that publishers take. I know this isn't all as easy as it sounds, but we should be pushing for this as a field. And also when peer reviewing, I think I quite often get sent stuff on the Rio Olympics that is by, when I see it come out, is by Brazilian authors. And there are issues with English, but I don't think you should ever be taking issue with peer review at that stage with English language. I know some people do. So please try and avoid that. Make sure, even if it's making a comment to the editor that it needs a thorough proofread, but make sure that you're engaging with the content. Don't reject things based on spelling and grammar and things like that. I mean, that's just good advice generally, but particularly when we're taking global submissions. And yeah, be open to having papers that aren't in English in these top journals.
That's an outstanding point, Adam, to wrap up. And I want to thank all of the panelists on behalf of all of the organizations associated with the leisure studies field. What a wonderful, wonderful job. I can tell you that if these are early career researchers and early career scholars, the field is in very, very good hands. And I want to thank all of you on behalf of everyone here. You did an outstanding job, and it was a real privilege to be able to facilitate this panel. I do want to point out that we have our next panel will be the first Friday in April, and it will be 1 year into the COVID-19 pandemic, what we've learned and looking into the future. And we'll have another outstanding panel representing the world, the globe, to discuss some of those issues. So with that, I want to say thank you very much. And I look forward to seeing many of you again sometime in the future.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for organizing, guys. Thanks.
Take care.